Tom Prentice entered the restaurant The Embers and looked around. More than 4 months had passed since he was last here, but nothing had changed. Lainey was serving Mr. Parker and hadn't noticed him yet. He wondered if she was still dating Jeff. Tom saw that his favorite booth was free and decided to sit in it, hoping that it would be in Lainey's service area. Tom has lived in Elmville his entire life. He was a little over 6 feet tall, weighed about 170 pounds, had dark hair and gray eyes, and looked pretty good. He attended local college until his world collapsed. After he dropped out of school on January 26th, he moved to Omaha to live with his Uncle Frank and Aunt Pearl. More precisely, he lived there until yesterday, when he decided that it was time to return and resume his life. He also received a letter from the funeral home asking him to come and pick up his mother's ashes. At the beginning of the year, Tom was the only child of Jack and Mary Prentice, but by mid-January he was an orphan, and most of his mother's family was angry with him. God, how he needed to leave here. So when Uncle Frank asked him to move to Omaha, it was a relief. Frank was his father's older brother and resembled him so much that when he lived with him, Tom could almost pretend his father was still around. Well, not completely forget, but at least imagine. At that moment, he was distracted by a waitress approaching. Damn, it wasn't Lainey. "Hello, honey, what can I bring you?" she asked. Can I ask Lainey to serve me? We are old friends. We each have our own zone, and now she's already busier than me." He took a tenner out of his wallet and asked, "What if I just rent this table for her until I leave?" "Honey," you agreed. "Less work and my best tea this week. I'll send it now." She took the money and disappeared. Tom thought again about everything that had happened since his return from Omaha. First, he went to his home and brought in the suitcases and boxes of food that Aunt Pearl had given him. He was afraid to open the refrigerator, but someone had already taken care of it, and there was no mushroom plantation there. Before leaving, he left the keys with a neighbor, Mr. Douglas, to look after the house, and he or his wife probably removed the refrigerator. The house itself looked the same as when he left. It was a big house. On the second floor, there were 3 spacious bedrooms, a bathroom, and a storage room. The third bedroom eventually became a family computer office with a desk where Tom always did his homework and a bookcase. The ground floor contained the kitchen, dining room, living room, and father's office, where he kept his desk and small work area. The basement included a laundry room, a full home gym, a bathroom with a 2-person shower and jacuzzi tub, and a workshop where he and his father worked on various projects. They built everything from birdhouses to a radio-controlled model of a World War II Mustang fighter plane. Damn, how he missed his father. Having laid out the groceries and put his suitcases away in his room, Tom walked around the entire house, checking the lights, water, and just getting used to his surroundings again. Entering my parents' bedroom proved particularly difficult. When he saw his mother's robe lying on her side of the bed and his father's pair of boots by the closet door, he felt for a moment that they were about to return. But he knew that this wouldn't happen. In their bathroom, all their belongings remained untouched. Soon he would have to decide what to do with them. On his way out of the room, he stopped in front of a photograph hanging on the wall by the door. She was less than a year old. In the picture, her parents stood in an embrace, turning to the camera. Father was like an exact copy of Tom, just as tall, with dark hair and gray eyes. Although both were attractive, Jack Prentice had a more stern side. Mom, Mary Prentice, smiled from the photo, making her beauty even more expressive. Her short brown hair framed her face, matching her brown eyes. She was slim 36-25-36. In the photo, the parents were wearing shorts and t-shirts, and their toned figures spoke of good physical shape. Tom took the photo off the wall and put it on a shelf in his bookcase. It was a wonderful photo, reminiscent of happy times. After touring the house, he called Mr. Douglas to thank him and promised to stop by in the next few days. Then he dialed a few more numbers to tell his friends that he was back. Having finished with this, he took out a couple of sandwiches that his aunt had prepared for him, took a soda from the refrigerator, and greedily ate everything. He didn't even notice how hungry he was. Then, feeling tired from the road and all the worries, he lay down on the bed and unexpectedly fell asleep, having woken up only this morning. "Hello, Tom. So you are our generous client." Lainey walked up behind him, catching him by surprise. He looked up and saw her smile. She was damn good. Since he last saw her, she had cut her dark brown hair so that it barely touched her shoulders. Her big brown eyes sparkled as she examined him. Apparently, she was wearing almost no makeup, although she didn't need it. "Hello, Lainey. I hope you're not offended that I asked you." Tom was embarrassed when he learned that she knew about his bribe and blushed slightly. "Of course not. I haven't seen you for ages. They said that you left the city, but no one knew where. You know, I was at your father's funeral, but I had to stand at the end of the hall. There were so many people there. I think you didn't notice me." "Oh no, I didn't see you. Sorry, it was so hectic." He knew a lot of people, and they all seemed to come. There were also problems with my mother's relatives. They were mad at me because they wanted to have a double ceremony, but I knew my father wouldn't want that. What a nightmare. I think you and everyone in town already know about this. This has probably been the main topic of discussion here for a while. I was in Omaha the whole time, staying with my aunt and uncle, so I was able to escape most of the consequences of the news and gossip. "Yeah, it was all over the place for a few days," Lainey said, "but no one has been discussing this for a long time. Now all the talk is about layoffs at the auto parts plant." "I heard about it. They even wrote in the Oma's newspaper. It's a pity for the city, but for me it's even better. I was afraid that I would be the center of attention when I returned. Okay, I should probably order some food before your other customers get mad at me." Lainey walked away and looked around her area, then returned to his table. "Everything is fine. Everyone already has reservations. There are no new tables yet," she said. She leaned a little closer and lowered her voice. "I hope you don't mind my question, but some people said they heard something that wasn't written in the newspapers. This is true. Well, that is, that the newspapers didn't tell everything." Tom hesitated and then said, "No, they didn't hide anything. They printed the whole story from the very beginning." Tom's eyes darkened and his smile disappeared. But after a moment, he smiled at Lainey again and said, "I guess I better order so you can tend to the other tables. We can talk later when you get back. I don't want you to have problems. I'll have a small steak, medium rare, fries and coffee. Oh, and a piece of pecan pie." "Of course," she replied. "I'll bring your coffee now. The food will be ready quickly." She smiled at him and left. Tom followed her with his eyes and noticed how her uniform trousers fit perfectly, emphasizing her appetizing curves. He realized that he was not the only one admiring this picture. A gray-haired man at one of the tables also turned to look after her. When he turned around again, their eyes met and they shared a knowing grin. While Tom was waiting for his order, he remembered his morning. He woke up early after a long and sound sleep. It was amazing how much of a difference it made in my own bed. After a morning trip to the bathroom, he pulled on a tracksuit and sneakers, then went down to the basement, where he had a small gym. He spent almost an hour on the machines and with dumbbells, after which, tired, sweaty, and hungry, he went to the shower. Luckily, his aunt sent him home with a basic supply of groceries, so he was able to make himself a decent omelet. While he was eating, he thought that his mother taught him how to cook well. Damn, he's going to miss her. Usually in the morning, they worked out together at the gym and then cooked and had breakfast. There were days when she even surpassed him in exercise, and it was noticeable. He had heard a couple of his friends call her MILF, although they always denied it when he caught them doing it. Deep down, he couldn't argue with them. She really had all the curves in place. Both his parents were still under 40, but his mother, in his opinion, looked barely 30. After eating, he put away the dishes and wiped down the stove and countertop. Now that the house was his, he was going to keep it in order. After finishing cleaning, he went to his neighbors, the Douglas, to thank them and pick up his spare key. They categorically refused to accept money for looking after the house, so he mentally decided to buy them a small gift and a certificate for a nice dinner. He understood that he would turn to them for advice more than once because he had no experience of owning a house. His thoughts were interrupted by Lainey bringing coffee. "Here's your coffee, Tom," she said. "Your order will be ready soon." She smiled as she placed the cup on the table, then hurried to pour coffee for the other customers. Tom only managed to thank her in the back and again found himself looking at how her uniform fit her figure. Damn, maybe you should just ask her out. The worst that could happen is that she'll say no if she's still dating Jeff. This would not be the first rejection in his life, and unlike some of his friends, he could bear the rejection without much shame. When Lainey was out of sight, he returned to his thoughts about his morning. He stopped by a lawyer and spent several hours there, signing documents transferring the house into his ownership, as well as papers allowing him to pay utilities and housing maintenance costs from his account. There were forms for opening new accounts and credit cards at the local bank, as well as insurance. When all matters were settled, he had a long conversation with Mr. Greenstein. Tom decided that he liked Fred Greenstein and that he could turn to him for advice when needed. After the law office, he stopped by the bank to hand over documents and withdraw some cash from his new account. Now he had an amount that would be enough for running expenses for a week or a little more. He knew that soon he would have to go to the supermarket and replenish his food supplies. After all this, he decided it was time to have lunch, and there was no better place than the Plaza restaurant. Lainey reappeared at his table and placed a tray of food in front of him. "Here's your lunch," she said. "I'm sure you'll like it. I'll bring you a pie later. It's just about time for my break, so if you don't mind, I'll join you for coffee." "Great," Tom replied. "I just wanted to talk to you a little more." Tom ate the food with gusto, and just as he had finished the last of the potatoes, Lainey brought out the pie and her cup of coffee. She sat down opposite him and smiled as he pushed the plate of pie towards him. He took the first spoon and said, "They definitely don't make a pie like this in Omaha." They didn't talk much as Tom finished his food, but once he was done, they started talking like old friends, reminiscing about people they knew and events that happened during their high school days. Lainey was a year younger than Tom, now finishing her senior year and planning to go to college in the fall. She was interested in Tom's opinion about college, as she was nervous about starting her studies. She also told him about everything that was happening in the city, especially about the news concerning their mutual acquaintances. Time flew by, and Lainey, looking at her watch, said, "Oh, I have to go back to work. My break is almost over." "That's fast," Tom was surprised. "You just sat down. I would like to tell you more about my parents, but there is no time now. Maybe I'll call you tonight, if that's okay." "Of course, I don't mind. That would be great. Here's my number," she said, handing Tom a note. "By the way, Lainey, I wanted to ask you," Tom began. "Are you still dating Jeff?" "I wouldn't want him to think I'm trying to steal his girlfriend," he laughed. "Oh no, that won't be a problem." "We broke up 2 months ago," she answered, and also laughed. "Oh, I see," said Tom. "Then I'll call you in the evening." They both stood up and Lainey began clearing their cups and Tom's plates from the table. She smiled and said, "I'll wait for your call." Tom took out his wallet and left a $10 bill on the table as a tip, then headed to the register to pay the bill while Lainey finished clearing the table. After that, Tom went to the supermarket and then returned home and started sorting out his purchases. The day turned out to be quite busy for him, so he decided to just relax. He went into the office and began to sort through the papers and documents that his father kept. Tom slowly tidied them up as best he could and ended up with a large pile of unwanted items. He realized that such things were difficult for him because everything reminded him of his father. Many more similar difficult tasks awaited him ahead. Deciding he deserved a break, he grabbed a cool drink and walked into the living room where he sat down in his father's favorite chair to relax a bit. As soon as he settled down, tears welled up in his eyes, thoughts of his parents came flooding back with renewed vigor. He put the soda on the table and headed to his room to get his father's letter from his bedside table drawer. Going downstairs, he sat down in the chair again and began to read. He had reread this letter many times, but each time it helped him calm down when his emotions overwhelmed him. Letter. My dear son, I don't even know how to write this letter. I'm terribly upset. I need to explain to you what happened, but I'm not sure I can. Besides, I might not have much time if the police arrive too quickly. I hope this doesn't happen. First things first. My lawyer is Fred Greenstein. He is my friend and a good lawyer. Bring him all these papers. He will definitely help you. I trust him. I have $500,000 in life insurance, and my home mortgage is insured as well. My mother and I also have insurance and retirement accounts at work. Fred can get all the details from our employers. The key to the safe deposit box is here on the table. It contains insurance documents and a few other things. I'm sorry, my thoughts are confused. In the box are my father's pocket watch, my mother's rings, and other things. Wills are also on the table. My mother and I have separate bank accounts, as well as a common one. Now all I have to do is start from the beginning. Yesterday morning, right after a coffee break, I received a call on the direct line. It was a woman, but I didn't recognize her voice. Later I asked who she was, but she refused to give her name. She just said that she was a friend. She said that your mother is cheating on me and today she will meet with this person again. I asked how she knew this, who this man was, and why I should believe her. All she said was that she had done her duty by telling me, and it was up to me what to do with that information. I told her I didn't believe it, and she hung up. I tried all day to put it out of my mind, but it kept coming back. It almost never left my thoughts. It seemed to me that such a thing was impossible to believe, but I could not understand why someone would call me and tell me such a story if it was a lie. You know my mother and I's story how we met on the first day of high school. Since then, we have always been together. Already in our senior year, we swore allegiance to each other. We were each other's first and only, and our vows meant everything to me. You have heard my mother call me her one and only more than once. These are not just words, this is a joke between us. But this call and our vows did not give me peace. All last night I hardly slept. I was immersed in my thoughts. I never asked my mother directly. I knew that if she was innocent, she would be angry that I had to ask at all, and if she was guilty, she would simply lie, and I would never know the truth. So I was silent, and it ate me up from the inside all evening. Fortunately, your mother did not notice my condition. I went to bed much later than she did, and when I came into the bedroom, she was already asleep. I hardly slept a wink. In the end, I decided to take the day off and follow her to prove to myself that the call was false. I got up before her and left while she was still sleeping. At work, I went to my boss and asked for a personal day. He agreed. I then approached Ralph Simpson, a colleague, and asked to swap cars for the day. He asked why I was doing this, and I said someone is bothering your mother, and I want to look after her. But since she insisted that she could handle it on her own and did not need my help, I decided that I needed a car that she did not recognize, otherwise she would be angry when she found out that I was following her. As soon as I said this, Ralph immediately agreed to exchange keys. Moreover, he offered me a .25 caliber machine gun that he had, wrapped in a rag under his seat, in case things went south. When I arrived at work, I went to my boss and told him that I needed a day off for personal reasons, and he agreed. I then approached Ralph Simpson, a colleague, and asked him to swap cars with me for the day. He wanted to know why I needed this, and I told him that someone was bothering your mother and I was going to keep an eye on her. Since she stated that she could take care of herself and did not need my help, I explained that I needed a car that she did not recognize because she would be angry if she knew that I was following her. After these words, he readily gave me his keys and even told me that under his seat he had a .25 caliber machine gun wrapped in a rag in case things got serious. I knew that your mother works from 9 to 12, and since my shift starts at 8, I had enough time to get home before she left. I parked at the end of the street and waited about 15 minutes until she got out and went to work. I stayed 1 block behind her the entire way and spent the entire morning watching her car in the parking lot from the street, a little further away. I had almost convinced myself that I was behaving like an idiot, that there was no point in sitting here and doubting her. I almost left at 11 o'clock, but I decided that after the nonsense I told Ralph, he would be very surprised if I gave up so quickly. She came out at 12:15, and I almost missed her because she changed her clothes. In the morning, she was wearing her gray business suit, and when she came out, she was wearing a red skirt that reached just above her knees and a white blouse with a low neckline. This is the same outfit she wore last month when we went out together. Seeing her in this made me feel terrible and almost got sick. She didn't have to change clothes just to go home after work, and that really alarmed me. When she left the parking lot, she turned in the opposite direction from where the house is, so I had to turn around to follow her. I barely managed to stop myself from stopping and vomiting. I was literally throwing up inside out. She eventually turned onto First Avenue and pulled into the parking lot of Amber's Steakhouse. I felt a little better because I thought she was just stopping by for lunch, but then she walked into a bar, not a restaurant. Then my stomach clenched into a tight knot again. I waited for half an hour until she came out. She didn't come out alone. With her was a tall, dark-haired man about our age in a suit. When they got to her car, he put his hand on her butt and pulled her towards him, then kissed her. At that moment, I realized that something was clearly wrong here. My heart began to beat wildly. I felt dizzy and almost lost consciousness. My eyes filled with tears, and I felt them running down my cheeks. She got into the car, and he into the black BMW, and they both pulled out of the parking lot in front of me. They were already a block away before I could put the car in gear and follow. I barely managed to keep track of them because I kept wiping away my tears. I don't remember what route we took, but we ended up at a motel on the corner of Front Street and 3rd Avenue. I think it's called Flamingo. I parked on the street, and your mother drove around the back of the building. The man in the BMW first entered the office, and then also drove behind the building. I waited 15 minutes, hoping your mother would just leave, but she never did. Then I decided to go and see what was happening there. While I was waiting, I decided that if she was really in a room with this man, I would divorce her. This calmed me down a little and made me stop crying. She came there of her own free will, and I knew I couldn't forgive her. I grabbed my digital camera, the same one I use at work to assess damage before leaving the office, and even forgot about it. I should have taken a photo of their kiss, but I was so stunned that I didn't even think about the camera. However, I decided that if I could get a picture of them together, the divorce would go smoothly. I was halfway to the back of the motel when I remembered Ralph's gun and decided to go back for it. This guy was bigger than me. Even though I was only going to take photos, I thought it would be a good idea to have a weapon with me so he couldn't take my camera. I immediately found the gun and put it in my jacket pocket. When I walked around the motel, both of their cars were parked there, about in the middle of the yard. There wasn't a single car there anymore. If they needed privacy, they got it. First, I photographed their cars, then your mother's car and the door with the license plate. I was hoping that I could find a crack in the window so I could take a photo and just leave, but the curtains were tightly closed. I can't believe how calm I was at that moment. It was like a dream, as if I was just an observer and not a real participant in the events. I decided to listen at the door. He pushed it slightly, and it opened slightly. There was a small gap in the frame. I put my ear to it, and then I heard her. Tom, there were nights when you heard your mother and I making love. We didn't try to advertise it, but sometimes we just didn't realize how loud we were until it was too late. As a child, you looked away in embarrassment in the morning. Lately at breakfast, you've just been telling us to turn down the volume. I know you heard your mother scream, and that's exactly what I heard at that door, and I lost control. I took 10 steps back and slammed my shoulder into the door with all my might. It simply shattered into chips and pieces of wood scattered across the room. I almost fell, but I held on, raised my camera, and took a few pictures before they could move. Tom, they were both completely naked, and your mother had her arms and legs wrapped around him. He had sex with her. It pains me to tell you this, but you need to know what I saw. My heart was breaking, Tom. Time seemed to stand still. My heart was breaking, Tom. I just stood there, and it felt like time stood still. Your mother screamed, then this guy screamed, "What the fuck?" and began to climb out of bed. The next moment, I pulled the pistol out of my pocket and shot at him. I don't know what he would have done if he had kept moving. I hit him square in the groin, and he fell to the floor, howling in pain. I don't know why, but I aimed at his head, said, "Bastard," and shot again. He collapsed backwards onto the carpet. I killed him, Tom. Your mother cried and repeated, "No, Jack, and please forgive me." I walked to the edge of the bed, my lips moved, but I could not utter a word. Finally, I managed to ask, "Why, Mary?" But she never answered. She just kept saying, "Please forgive me," and "I love you, Jack," over and over again. She sat there, crying, swaying, clutching her knees to her chest. She pulled the sheet over her knees and just rocked, repeating the same thing. I kept asking her, "Why, Mary?" But she didn't seem to hear me at all. Finally, I reached out, grabbed the edge of the sheet, and slowly pulled it towards me. It was all in slow motion, Tom. This moment constantly returns to my thoughts, as if in slow motion. As the sheet slid off her lap, I noticed the traces of his presence left on the bed. Tom, I just lost control. I started crying again, and then shouted at her, "Why?" But all she did was stop rocking. She was still crying and repeating, "I love you, Jack." I said, "I thought I was your one and only," raised the gun and shot her in the head. The last thing she said before the shot was, "No, Tom, I'm so sorry, but I killed your mother." After that, I just stood there for I don't know how long, looking at them. Gradually, I began to come to my senses, as if waking up from a nightmare. I saw their two motionless bodies. Your mother slowly slid to the side, towards the headboard, and was now lying across the pillows. Her boyfriend was sprawled on the carpet, his hands falling off his groin. When I regained consciousness, I realized what I had done and how much it would ruin your life. I vomited and vomited forcefully onto the carpet at the foot of the bed. I vomited again and again until nothing else came out of me. I began to think about what to do next and expected the police to appear at any second. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that I needed to get home to explain everything to you before the police did. I stood in a room with two corpses and an open door. I was sure that a crowd of onlookers had already gathered and that the police sirens were about to appear, but when I looked outside, only their two cars were parked there. Then I realized that maybe I could run away and tell you everything myself. Your mother's purse was on the table next to the bed. I grabbed it and found the keys. I thought I could save time by driving her car home, so I did that. I was already opening the door when I noticed that the motel room door was left wide open. I didn't want everyone to see her naked, so I threw my purse on the seat, went back and wedged the door shut with one of the large pieces of wood from the broken frame. On the way home, I figured out how to prevent this nightmare from ruining your life. Tom, you have to understand that everything I've done since I shot your mother and that bastard is for you. At that moment in that room, I wasn't thinking about you at all, and I ask you for forgiveness for that. I hope one day you can forgive me. I keep waiting for the police to show up, but it's already 5 in the evening, and they still haven't arrived. I think if the bodies were found, they have no way of identifying your mother. I took her purse and car. I hope I can do everything I need to do before you return at 6 or before the police show up. Now I feel calm because it seems that my plan will work. In our safe deposit box, there is a deed for our place in Shady Grove Cemetery. We bought it last year for both of us. I do not want to be buried next to your mother. If I'm buried in this plot, find another place for her. I'm sorry, but the more I think about it, the less forgiving I feel for her. If she had kept her vows and stayed true, none of this would have happened. If I'm buried next to her, everyone will think we were a devoted couple. I thought so, but I was wrong. Tom, you probably think I should have stayed and hired a good lawyer. But the problem is that even a good lawyer would hardly acquit me. We would have gone broke, lost our house and all our savings, and I would still have ended up in prison. I don't want to spend the rest of my life behind bars. Without money, you would have to drop out of college. And the worst thing is the endless conversations, rumors, and attention from journalists. All this would go on for months until the trial was over, and you would be constantly pestered by reporters and gossip. I don't want you to go through this. This way, everything will end cleanly and quickly. Please return the digital camera to the office. I deleted all the photos. Nobody should see them. Ralph's keys are on the table. His car is parked on the street in front of the motel. Please apologize to him for getting him into this. If he is fined because of the gun, or if it is confiscated, pay him damages. If the police have not yet seen this letter by the time you read it, hide it. I don't want journalists to get to it and publish it. They don't need it to understand what happened. For them, I will leave a separate confession on the kitchen table. By doing it my way, you will remain wealthy with a home. We've had insurance policies for a long time now, so the suicide clauses have expired. They are valid for only 2 years. You're old enough to handle things on your own. If you need advice, ask Douglas, my brother Frank, your Aunt Pearl, or Fred Greenstein. Please try to forgive me, Tom. I really wish things had turned out differently, but what's done is done. If the police haven't arrived by the time you read this, call them. Tell them to go to room 122 at the Flamingo Motel, and I'll go to the backyard. I'll be under the oak tree behind the garage. Your loving father. After reading the letter, Tom leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep, he just sat and thought about his life and how much it had changed. Time passed quickly while he was lost in thought, and when he finally straightened up and looked at his watch, he realized that his eyes were filled with tears. After wiping them away, he could see that it was time to call Lainey. He took his mobile phone, took out a piece of paper with her number from his wallet, and began to dial numbers. Tom turned off his phone after an hour of pleasant conversation with Lainey. He told her about what happened 4 months ago when his parents died. Now she understood what he had been through and why he had left for Omaha the day after his mother's funeral. He explained to Lainey why he did not hold the funeral for both parents at the same time, but arranged for his mother to say goodbye the next day. A full farewell was held for his father, including burial in the family plot at Shady Grove Cemetery. But since Tom decided not to bury his mother's ashes in the same grave as his father, he had to purchase a separate place for her and organize a ceremony. Before ending the conversation, they agreed to meet on Friday evening. Tom invited Lainey to go to a stock car race at a local dirt track. Lainey had never been to a race, but Tom was a big fan. He hoped she would like it too. There were 3 days left until their date, but he knew he had a lot to do. The next morning, Tom was in no hurry. After a leisurely breakfast, he left the house to go about his business. The first thing he did was go to the Department of Motor Vehicles to re-register 2 family cars. His lawyer, Fred Greenstein, had already prepared all the paperwork, so all that was left was for Tom to submit the forms and pay the necessary fees. Afterwards, he stopped by the funeral home to pick up his mother's ashes. They seemed happy that the urn containing her ashes was finally leaving their facility. The last stop before lunch was Shady Grove Cemetery, where he met with the manager and chose a site for his mother's ashes. It was located about 50 yards from his father's grave, behind a large oak tree that prevented one burial from being visible from the other. Tom thought that his father would approve of this choice and hoped that his mother's parents would not object either. They were pleased with the ceremony he had organized for her, and he hoped that the burial site would not be a source of controversy. He went to the Plaza restaurant for lunch, even though he knew Lainey wouldn't be there. He was lucky to catch her the day before she worked there only 1 day a week, since on other weekdays she had classes at the university. Tom had a leisurely lunch and then headed to his grandparents' house. He knew he had to talk to them, let them know that he had chosen a place for his mother's burial, and find out when would be the best time for the ceremony. Approaching the door of the house, Tom felt nervous. While he was in Omaha, he didn't talk to his grandparents often, but when he called, they seemed friendly. They must have seen him from the window because grandfather opened the door himself. "Tom, come in. We're so glad to see you," Bob Nolan said, giving his grandson a bear hug and then releasing him so he could enter. Bob was as tall as Tom, with dark eyes and prematurely gray hair. In his early 50s, he was in excellent shape. "Mary, come out. Tom has arrived." Mary Nolan came out of the kitchen into the living room, her face lit up with a warm smile. "Tom, how many years, how many winters? We missed you so much," she said. "Grandma, how glad I am to see you. Grandfather, both of you. I thought about you often," Tom said, hugging his grandmother and kissing her on the cheek. They walked into the kitchen, where his grandparents insisted that he have coffee with them. "How are you, Tom? How is it in Omaha?" "We thought you'd never come back," said the grandfather. "Everything is fine, thank you. Omaha is a nice city, but it's not home. It's nice to be here again," Tom replied. He was pleased to see that his grandparents were happy to have him back. They were not so welcoming when he told them that his father did not want to be buried next to his mother. Tom explained that he had purchased a place for his mother's ashes and asked when would be the best time to hold the ceremony. In the end, they agreed that he first needed to come to an agreement with the priest. His grandparents also reminded him that he would need to order tombstones, something Tom hadn't even thought about. He thanked them for the reminder and promised to look into it soon. They sat at the table for a long time, talking and sharing news. At some point, when Tom was about to leave, his grandmother took him by the hand and said, "You know that we forgave your father for everything that happened, right? We both understand that Mary herself had a lot to do with this. Yes, we wish your father would have chosen a different way to deal with the situation, but life doesn't always go the way we want it to. We survived this, and we want you to forgive us too for being so strict with you because of the funeral. No hard feelings at all, Grandma, and I'm glad we put all this behind us." Tom hugged his grandma again, then stepped back to look at her. She looked so much like his mother, and he could imagine that if his mother had been her age, she would have looked exactly the same. When Tom went out to his car, his grandfather went with him. "If you need anything, Tom, be sure to call us. We want to help you in any way we can." Tom thanked him for the offer, then waved goodbye and drove away, greatly relieved to have been received so warmly. By late Friday evening, Tom had completed all funeral arrangements for his mother and had headstones made and installed for both of his parents. He even managed to stop by the college to negotiate a return to school as soon as possible. The consultants were very responsive, and he was now enrolled in 2 summer courses. They assured him that he could fully catch up over the next 12 months if he didn't mind a little extra work. Tom arrived at Lainey's house at 4 o'clock in the afternoon to pick her up for race night. He told her that they would stop for burgers on the way, so there was no point in having dinner beforehand. When he knocked on the door, it was answered by a woman whom Tom took to be Lainey's older sister. She had shorter hair than Lainey, but both had brown eyes and brown hair, and Tom saw a clear similarity in their facial features. "Hi, I'm Tom Prentice, here to pick up Lainey," he said. The woman smiled, turned, and shouted, "Elaine, I hope you're ready. Your date has arrived." This was the first time Tom heard Lainey's real name, because that's what everyone called her in high school. He was still processing this discovery when he heard Lainey reply from deep inside the house. "Mom, you know how much I hate that name. Just call me Lainey like everyone else. I'll be there now." Tom looked at the woman in surprise. "Are you Lainey's mom? I was sure you were her sister." "Oh, thank you, Tom. That's very nice to hear," the woman smiled. "I'm Grace Frost, Elaine's mother. That is, Lainey." She held out her hand, and Tom shook hers firmly. "Come in," she invited. "I'm sure she'll stay longer than she promised, so you can wait inside." Tom and Grace stood in the living room talking about high school while they waited for Lainey. When she finally came out, she walked up to her mother, hugged her, and said goodbye. Tom compared them standing next to each other and remarked, "Without a doubt, you really look more like sisters than mother and daughter." He looked from one to the other and still had a hard time believing that Grace was Lainey's mother. Lainey laughed. "It's time for us to go, Tom. If you keep saying that, Mom won't let us go and will force us to stay for the evening. I told her more than once that she didn't look her age, but she didn't believe me. Maybe she will believe me now." They said goodbye to Grace and went on their first date. It wasn't far from the most popular burger joint on Main Street, and along the way they chatted about their school friends. Having received their order, they sat down at a table in the far corner and continued their conversation. "I'm seriously surprised your mom looks so young, Lainey," Tom said, taking a bite of his burger. "In fact, there is a whole story behind this. My mother is only 34 years old. She recently had a birthday. She had just turned 16 when I was born," Lainey replied. "Wow, it's really early. Nowadays, this rarely happens. No wonder she looks like your big sister. What about your father?" Tom asked. "I don't know much about him, only what my mother told me. He died in a car accident a couple of months before I was born. When I was little, I often visited his parents, that is, my grandparents, but my grandmother died when I was 6, and my grandfather moved out a few years later. He calls sometimes. After he moved, my mother and I were left alone, and my mother's parents also died several years ago." "So your mother raised you alone? It must have been difficult for her." "Yes, it was difficult. Her parents helped a little, but were not very supportive as they worked to support the rest of the family. Mom graduated from school remotely and got a job as a secretary at an auto parts manufacturing plant. Now she is worried because she knows that her working hours will soon be reduced." Lainey's face showed concern as she told Tom about her mother's problems. "Wow, your mom has really been through a lot," Tom said respectfully, amazed at how Grace handled motherhood, school, and work at the same time. "It was hard, but my mother always made sure that we had everything we needed. Sometimes she works a second job as a waitress in one of the bars in the city center, but she doesn't like it there." They continued their conversation through dinner, then moved on to discuss the races they were about to see. By the time the last race ended at 11 p.m., Lainey was almost as excited about racing as Tom. She chose her favorite driver and watched with delight as he overtook Tom's favorite on the last lap. Halfway through the evening, as they walked through the crowd at the concession stand, Tom took Lainey's hand so he wouldn't get lost. It happened so naturally that he didn't even think about it in advance. They returned to their seats, still holding hands. From that moment on, both did not miss the opportunity to take each other's hands when moving between areas of the stadium. When the race was over and they headed to the car, their hands were intertwined again. As they emerged from the busy highway parking lot, Tom asked, "Would you like to stop by the lake for a while before we head back to town?" Tom hoped Lainey would agree because he really wanted to be alone with her. He had always found her attractive, but now that he knew her a little better, he liked her even more. The thought of being able to hold her and kiss her excited him, and he hoped that Lainey wouldn't notice his excited state. Lainey thought for a few moments and said, "Not today, okay, Tom? I really enjoyed this evening, and maybe we'll go to the lake another time. My mom and I have an agreement that if I'm dating someone new, I need to get to know them well first before spending a lot of time alone with them." Lainey looked at Tom warily. Several of her former boyfriends got angry when she told them about her rules. She was afraid that she had made a mistake about Tom and that he would react the same way. "No problem, Lainey. I also really enjoyed being with you and would be happy to invite you again. My parents also had rules for me. Although they are no longer there, I try to follow them," Tom answered and smiled at her. Lainey immediately smiled in response. "Thank you for your understanding, Tom. My mother and I are very close, and I could not go against her will. I'd love to go on a date with you again, just tell me when." She reached out and squeezed his hand, then let go. On the way home, they stopped for a glass of soda and continued their cheerful conversation. They agreed to meet again the following Friday evening, but had not yet decided where exactly they would go. When they pulled up to Lainey's house, she quickly leaned over and kissed Tom softly before saying goodbye and getting out of the car. Opening the front door, she turned and waved at him. Tom left with a big smile on his face. The following week, Tom was busy preparing for his mother's funeral. They were scheduled for Sunday at 14 o'clock. He called many relatives, his parents' former employers, and couples who were friends with his mother and father. An announcement to this effect was placed in the Friday edition of the newspaper. On Wednesday, he called Lainey and they agreed to go to the movies on Friday. After learning that Tom had no dinner plans, Lainey revealed that her mom had invited him to dinner at their place before the movie. Tom gladly accepted the invitation. Although he knew how to cook, living alone, he was often content with quick and boring dishes. The rest of the week he was busy with business, and also began to sort out his parents' things, their clothes, and personal belongings. He decided to offer them to his grandparents and aunt and uncle first, and donate the rest to a charity shop. This turned out to be a very difficult task, because every object reminded him of his parents. He hoped that once he got rid of these daily reminders, he would feel better. On Friday afternoon, Tom arrived at Lainey's house just after 4 o'clock and brought with him a bottle of wine from his parents' collection. He had a large wine rack filled with bottles in his basement, and he decided to thank Lainey's mother for the invitation. Grace Frost accepted the gift with gratitude, and for the next hour, while she and Lainey finished preparing dinner and setting the table, the three of them chatted happily in the kitchen. Having made sure that the young people were not going to go to the cinema until 7 in the evening, Grace decided to pour half a glass of wine for each of them. For Tom, this was a common thing. His parents did not think that a little wine at dinner could spoil him. He was glad that Grace was of the same opinion. After a wonderful dinner, Tom and Lainey were washing the dishes when Grace asked, "Tom, I hope I'm minding my own business, but do you know anything about the man who was with your mother that day?" "There is no problem that you ask. It's just that I myself know almost nothing about him except his name. His name was Frank Nelson, but it was written in the newspapers many times, so I think you already knew," Tom answered, put down the towel, and turned to Grace. "What torments me most is that I will probably never know why my mother was with him in the first place. It was obvious from my father's letter that he had no suspicion of any such thing. I myself didn't know anything either." Grace stood up from the table, walked over to Tom, and gently placed her hand on his wrist. "Sorry if I touched on a painful topic. I didn't want to bring up unpleasant memories. I never understood why married people, being happy in their marriages, risk everything for the sake of an affair on the side. But since it happens so often, I think they just don't expect to get caught." "It's okay," said Tom. "I had a lot of time to think about this and much more. What worries me is not so much the question itself as the fact that I may never know the answer." He fell silent and then continued, much more seriously. "It was very difficult for me to understand how my father could do what he did. But when I met with my uncle's pastor in Omaha, he explained it to me from a biblical perspective. He spoke about the prohibition of adultery and about human weaknesses. This helped a little, but I had already accepted that I would never get some answers." Their conversation drifted smoothly to other topics, and by the time the dishes were washed and put away, all three were in good spirits. They moved into the living room, where Tom and Lainey sat on the sofa, and Grace sat comfortably on the chair opposite them. At some point, while they were joking around, Tom asked Grace to join them on a movie date. She was just sipping her second glass of wine and, laughing, said, "You guys probably don't want to take the old lady with you." Lainey quickly responded, "You're not old at all, Mom." She glanced at Tom and then added, "I'm sure Tom was serious. I wouldn't mind if you came with us, as long as you sit in the row in front so we can have some privacy." She giggled. Lainey's remark brought a blush to Tom's face, and he quickly said, "I'm really serious. If you want to come with us, I'm sure we'll have a great time." After some persuasion, Grace agreed to join the young couple to watch the film. As Lainey had suggested, Grace took a seat in front and never turned around to spy on the couple. If she wanted, she could see their first real kiss or one of the many that would follow. However, she only turned around when one of them whispered to her, offering her some popcorn or joking about her role as their chaperone. After the movie, their group date continued at the Plaza restaurant, where they ordered appetizers and continued exchanging jokes. It never ceases to amaze Tom how easily Grace fits into their group and how easily she could step out of the role of Lainey's mother. Later, as Tom was driving his pickup truck back to the Frost house, Lainey put her arm around his shoulder and snuggled close to him. Her mother sat nearby, studiously trying not to pay attention to the young couple. It was the only moment all evening when Grace truly felt out of place. As soon as they arrived at the house, she immediately opened the door and went out, saying, "I want to thank you both for taking this old lady on a date with you. It was the most enjoyable evening I've had in a long time." She smiled widely at them both and added, "Don't stay too long, Lainey. Good night, Tom, and thanks again." After saying goodbye to their mother, Tom and Lainey soon returned to the kissing they had started in the movie theater. Their passion grew, and at some point Tom's fingers began to slowly move down from her shoulder when Lainey stopped him. "As much as I like this, Tom, it's time for me to go." She gently pulled away from his embrace, despite his playful protests, and moved back into her seat before returning for one last kiss. Opening the door, she said, "I'll see you on Sunday at the service for your mother." "Good night, Tom. I had a great time." Tom quickly replied, "I really enjoyed tonight too, Lainey. Be sure to bring your mom on Sunday. The service will only take about 20 minutes, and then I invited the guests for coffee and cake at my home. My aunt and uncle from Omaha will be coming, as will my grandparents." After saying his final goodbyes, Tom drove away, aware of how excited he was and mentally planning to take a shower to deal with it. On Saturday, Tom spent the day preparing the house to receive guests after the memorial service. He sorted through his parents' remaining clothes and belongings, deciding what to keep and what to give away. He planned to invite his grandparents, aunt, and uncle over for dinner on Sunday night and have them pick out items before donating the rest to a charity. He prepared burger patties and salads ahead of time and bought enough pastries and cakes for guests after the burial ceremony for his mother's ashes. On Sunday morning, he completed his final preparations. After lunch, making sure that everything was ready, he began to get ready for the cemetery service. Arriving 20 minutes before the start, he brought with him an urn containing his mother's ashes and met his grandparents. Soon their aunt and uncle joined them. In the last 10 minutes before the ceremony began, many people arrived at the cemetery, and Tom found himself surrounded by guests expressing their condolences. At 14 o'clock, the minister began the funeral ceremony, which was attended by about 40 people. As expected, the service lasted 20 minutes, after which Tom invited anyone who wished to join him at home for coffee and cake. His grandparents, aunt, and uncle left first to meet the guests, while Tom himself stayed to talk with the pastor. When he finally said goodbye to him, Tom noticed that the only people left in the cemetery besides him were Lainey, Grace Frost, and another woman. He thanked Lainey and Grace for coming and insisted they go to his house. Then he walked towards the stranger, a pretty 40-year-old blonde who seemed to be waiting for him. He immediately noticed that she was upset, but did not recognize her as a family friend or someone he had met before. "Hello, I'm Tom Prentice. I'm afraid I don't recognize you. Did you know my parents?" The woman looked even more worried and said, "Nice to meet you, Tom. My name is Liz Nelson. My husband, Frank, was with your mother when your father, when everything happened." She fell silent, and it was clear that it was difficult for her to continue. "I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time, but I couldn't find you. I was in Omaha after the funeral and only returned a couple of weeks ago," Tom answered, alert. He wondered if she was going to make some sort of claim against him, perhaps even sue him, over her husband's death. Liz stood halfway between his parents' graves, and as they talked, they slowly walked closer to his father's grave, moving away from the pastor who was now talking to Lainey and Grace. The woman was clearly excited and, unable to stand it, spoke through tears. "I wanted to say how sorry I am for everything that happened. It's my fault." She sobbed and continued. "I was the one who told your father that your mother was dating my husband again. If I had remained silent, nothing would have happened." She burst into tears, and Tom hesitantly put his arm around her shoulders, not knowing what to do. "Please don't think like that," he said sympathetically, then paused and continued. My father wrote me a letter after, and he didn't blame you at all, and I don't blame. The circumstances just happened. The gun was not his. He just happened to have it, and if not for this unexpected turn of events, the worst that could have happened was a big fight. She buried her face in his shoulder and continued to cry. After maybe a minute, she started to calm down, and Tom asked, "What can you tell me about my mother and your husband? Do you know why they were together? Was she going to leave my father and me for your husband?" Tom held his breath, hoping that she could shed light on the events that had so changed his life. Liz Nelson straightened up and took a handkerchief from her purse. Blowing her nose and wiping her eyes, she said, "Frank had many affairs over the years of our marriage, but he never intended to leave me for any of these women. Frank was a salesman, and a very good salesman, suave, charming, and quite attractive. He was able to convince many women, even those who considered themselves happily married, that he had something special for them. I got so tired of it that I finally called your father. I hoped he would find a way to end this, but I couldn't even imagine what it would lead to." She started crying again. "Do you think my mother didn't love him? That it was just a fleeting romance that he managed to drag her into?" Tom couldn't believe that the culprit was an experienced seducer who was somehow able to seduce his mother. Liz Nelson wiped her eyes again and continued, "I doubt very much that there was anything more between them than just another successful sale of Frank. He knew how to present himself so well that he managed to convince your mother to meet with him. I spoke with several of his former colleagues, interests, and they said that Frank made great efforts to break their resistance. I know what he was like. After all, he managed to convince me to marry him, and then, every time he had an affair, again and again forced me to forgive him. He knew how to speak in such a way that I continued to love him, despite all his betrayals." She began to cry quietly again. Tom realized that he might never fully understand his mother's actions, but now he at least had a version of how it could have happened. It was difficult to reconcile this with the image of his mother that he knew, but in the end he decided that it was equally difficult for him to understand how his father could react this way. He thanked Liz for telling him about his mother and her husband, explaining that it made him more aware of the situation. She was still crying quietly when she turned to leave. Tom remained standing at his father's grave and said quietly, "Does this help you better understand what happened then, Dad?" He stood there for a couple more minutes until the tears began to dry in his eyes, and then he slowly left the empty cemetery and headed to his pickup truck to return home to the others. As Tom drove home from the cemetery, his mood gradually changed from deep sadness to a kind of humility. He knew that his parents were no more, and no amount of wishing could change that fact. His conversation with Mrs. Nelson led him to recognize that his parents' deaths could be seen as a tragic chain of events. Each of them could have acted differently at some point, and then everything would have turned out differently. When he came to this conclusion, he had already arrived at the house. The street in front of him was lined with cars, and he was surprised at the number of them. Tom entered the house through the back door and almost collided with his grandmother in the kitchen, who was hurriedly carrying a coffee pot. His aunt cut the cake and placed the pieces on a tray along with the pastries he had bought, then followed his grandmother into the dining room. Tom immediately went to the coffee maker to put on new coffee. The next half hour passed in a bustle. Guests were treated to food, and dirty dishes were brought back to the kitchen. Tom managed to chat with people he hadn't yet spoken to at the cemetery, and also met a couple of his mother's colleagues who came to support him. As a result of that day, he realized that many people, many of whom were almost strangers to him, were sincerely mourning the death of his parents. They offered him help if necessary, and Fred Greenstein and his wife were especially persistent in this, assuring him that they wanted to help him not as a client, but as family friends. But just as quickly as this fuss began, it ended. Soon the only people left in the house were his grandparents, his aunt and uncle, the Frost couple, and his neighbors, Al and Sarah Douglas. Now that there were fewer people, they could drink their coffee in peace. At some point, Tom was introducing the guests to each other and accidentally called Lainey his girlfriend. Realizing his slip, he became embarrassed His face turned pink, and the guests laughed quietly as they watched him try to correct the mistake. Laney didn't laugh, however, but simply smiled at him. When they had finished their coffee and the neighbors had left, Tom invited Laney and Grace to look around the house, while their aunt and grandmother put away the dishes. The girls were impressed by its size and were surprised to learn that Tom now owned it debt-free as the mortgage was covered by insurance. When they went upstairs, Tom showed them his room, and before going down, he went with them into his parents' former bedroom. Both girls commented on how spacious it was, and Grace casually remarked that Tom might want to consider moving in there once the room was emptied of his parents' belongings. This thought did not occur to him, since he always believed that this room belonged to them, but now it seemed quite reasonable. Later that night, as he thought about what he had said, he realized that this step might help him finally realize that his parents were gone and come to terms with it. When Tom returned to the first floor with Laney and Grace, he tried to persuade them to join his family for dinner. They both thanked him for the invitation, but said that he would rather spend time with his family and that they would be happy to have dinner with him another day. Left with his family, Tom relaxed in the living room. He found a couple of bottles of beer in the refrigerator for his uncle and grandfather and opened a bottle of wine for his aunt and grandmother. The five of them had a long and pleasant conversation, during which his grandparents expressed concern about how he would cope with life on his own. Tom explained his financial situation to them and said that Fred Greenstein had taken care of all the legal formalities necessary to transfer his parents' inheritance to him. After he explained everything in detail, his family calmed down noticeably, making sure that everything was fine with him. His aunt and uncle already knew some of the details, but his recent meeting with Mr. Greenstein had clarified many questions that none of them, including Tom himself, had thought about before. Later in the day, Tom offered the adults another drink, and then, convincing them that he could handle it himself, began preparing dinner. He prepared Greek salad and a big bowl of potato salad as a side dish for the burgers he planned to grill in the garden. He prepared everything in the kitchen in advance, including sauces, and set the table on the terrace. In less than an hour, the burgers were ready, and he invited everyone to plate their plates in the kitchen buffet style, after which everyone sat down at the table on the terrace. Tom was pleased with how his family received his treat. He proudly said that he benefited from the cooking skills his mother taught him and gratefully accepted their compliments. When they saw that he could cook and serve a good dinner for guests on his own, their last doubts about his ability to live on his own were dispelled. Tom felt relieved that everything had gone well, and this strengthened his sometimes shaky self-confidence. Later, when dinner was finished and everyone was relaxing in the living room again, Tom reminded his family that he wanted them to look at his parents' things, mostly clothes that he had decided to give away. Each of them chose something that could be useful or fit. However, when they finally made it downstairs and began to say goodbye, there was still a lot of stuff left. The uncle and aunt were staying with friends and were planning to return to Omaha the next morning. Tom's grandparents assured Tom that he could visit them anytime and promised to visit him often. Finally, the long day came to an end and Tom was able to sit down and relax. It seemed to him that he had reached an important milestone in life and was now ready to start an independent life. From that moment on, he knew that he would be able to make decisions and be responsible for them. It was a relief, but also a little scary. Later that evening, after he had finished cleaning up from the day, Tom called Laney. He thanked her for coming to the service and apologized for the poor performance. "I don't want you to think that I wouldn't want you as my girlfriend," he said with a laugh, "but I think we should get to know each other a little better before making such assumptions." Laney laughed too. "You don't need to apologize. To be honest, I was even pleased." During the conversation, Tom mentioned that he still had a lot of his parents' clothes that he was going to pack and donate to charity. These were mostly his mother's clothes. "What kind of things were left there?" Laney asked. "Well, skirts and blouses, a few dresses, and basically all of her underwear. Aunt wears larger clothes, but Grandma has a completely different taste. They chose a few things, but not many." "Do you know what size she was?" Lainey asked. "If you're going to get rid of them anyway, maybe something would suit my mom. If it's not too much trouble for you." Now that her working hours will be reduced, she is very worried about money. Lainey sounded a little unsure, but Tom responded immediately. "It's not difficult for me at all, Lainey. Give me a minute and I'll tell you the sizes." He went upstairs, still holding the cordless phone, and opened his mother's closet. "I see M, 12 and 14 on some things." He walked over to the bed and began to undo her underwear. Bras are mostly 36C, and many items are labeled size M. Lainey was silent for a second and then said, "Looks like a lot of this might suit my mom, or even me." "Let's do this, Lainey. I won't pack her things for another day or two, and if you and Mom want to see what's there, I'll be only too glad." They agreed that Lainey and Grace would stop by the next evening after dinner to see if they could grab anything. After the conversation ended, Tom walked over to the bed, picked up one of the beautiful sheer bras and matching bikini panties, both a stunning blue, and presented them to Lainey. He smiled to himself, then carefully put the things back and left the room. The next day, Tom started his summer courses. He enrolled in computer science last September, but only completed his first semester before dropping out at the start of his second, when his life fell apart. These 2 summer courses, combined with an additional subject in each subsequent semester, will allow him to catch up with the program by the end of his second year. He was pleased to start studying again, because it was another step towards getting his life back on track. He and Lainey discussed their plans for the future, and she told him that she dreamed of becoming an occupational therapist. Lainey mentioned that their home university didn't offer that major, so she would have to go to State University, which was 4 hours away. Their different educational paths meant that their budding friendship likely wouldn't develop into anything more than a summer romance. Tom didn't know what Lainey thought about this, but he himself felt noticeably disappointed at the thought. Tom spent the day on campus, re-immersing himself in the learning environment. He had doubts about whether he could return to this life after everything that had happened to him since his last visit here, but by the time he went home, he was already looking forward to starting classes and finishing his education. He really looked forward to the next school day, which was scheduled for the end of the week. He would be on campus 2 full days a week throughout the summer, but he knew it wouldn't be hard to find the motivation to do so. Around 7 o'clock in the evening, Lainey and Grace Frost arrived to look at his mother's wardrobe. He told them he was glad they wanted to do it because it seemed like a better idea than just taking the items to the donation box at the supermarket. When they entered the bedroom, the women were surprised to see how many clothes were laid out on the bed. "My God, there are so many things here. Hopefully something will work for us," Lainey said. "There are clothes in the closet too," Tom added. He opened the doors of a large closet in which only his mother's things now hung. He had already put away his father's clothes, putting them in several boxes in the corner of the room. "Everything is in excellent condition," he explained. "Mom always took care of her appearance, and this was one of the reasons why she worked. She wanted to be able to dress well." "We'll need some time to try everything on," Grace said, taking the dress out of the closet, and then looked at Tom expectantly. Several seconds passed before he understood the hint, after which he immediately blushed and hurriedly said, "Oh, exactly. I'll go downstairs and make us some coffee. There is a mirror on the inside of the door, and also in the bathroom on the shower door." He quickly left the room, closing the door behind him. Still a little embarrassed, he busied himself making coffee, wondering why it had taken him so long to realize that he couldn't stay in the bedroom while they tried on clothes. However, as he thought about it, he couldn't help but imagine Lainey and Grace changing clothes, sorting through their outfits. This thought suddenly seemed extremely exciting to him. After about 20 minutes, the women came downstairs, laughing and talking to each other. By this point, Tom had almost finished his coffee, but he immediately stood up to pour the drink for himself and for them. "Well, did you manage to find something?" he asked. "Yes, it was like Christmas when I was a kid. Almost everything suited us, if not one, then the other. Your mother had great taste in clothes, and I hope you don't mind if we take away a lot of what was there," Grace said enthusiastically, while Lainey, standing nearby, nodded vigorously, smiling. Take whatever you like. I'm just glad to see that someone needs these things. I could already imagine how many of them would end up in bags of rags for auto repair shops, Tom said with sincere joy. Lainey walked up to him with a big smile on her face. Your mom's blue dress is perfect for my prom. It's through Friday. I wasn't going to go there at all because I didn't want to spend money on a new dress and nothing I had fit. And I didn't have a boyfriend. I would really like you to come with me. This will be on my 18th birthday, and I would be extremely pleased if you became my companion. It's funny, my mother will work there, but I didn't even intend to go. Please do me the honor of joining me. Tom smiled widely. I'd love to go with you, Lainey. I remember this blue dress my mother wore on her wedding anniversary with my father. It's really very beautiful. Lainey happily hugged both her mother and Tom. I'm so happy. Until recently, I didn't even think that I would go. Tom thought about her words and asked, how did it happen that you didn't have a date? It's hard to believe. Well, I was supposed to go with Jeff, but we broke up. He invited another girl, and it was too late for me to look for a new gentleman. All the guys in the class had already decided on their plans by that time. Grace added, I initially agreed to work at the prom checking tickets and keeping order. I didn't want to back out of the commitment, but it felt weird that I would be there and Lainey would stay at home. And then, when my hours were cut, we decided that spending money on a dress when she wasn't going to go anyway wasn't a good idea. Grace looked at her daughter with pride and, putting her arm around her shoulders, added, everything turned out just great. Now she not only has a beautiful dress, but also a wonderful gentleman who will take her there. Tom clapped his hands and said, well, since everything is decided, let's have some coffee, and then I'll help you pack your things and load them into the car. He laughed cheerfully and added, if everything doesn't fit, we can transport some of it in my truck or Mom's car. I started her recently, and she's fine, and so we don't remember the clothes when we push them into your car. The three chatted animatedly as they finished their coffee. Tom helped the two women pack the clothes they were going to take, and then helped carry them to the car. It turned out that everything couldn't fit in one car, so the remaining things were loaded into Tom's car, and he drove them to the Frost family's house. Lainey rode along with Tom, excitedly telling him about her upcoming prom and her plans for the dance that night. By the time they arrived, Tom was looking forward to the day, just as excited as Lainey. The following Saturday, Tom and Lainey planned to spend the day at the beach and then go out to dinner. It was a beautiful day, and they spent almost as much time in the water as they did on the sand trying to get a tan. Tom's most memorable moment was being entrusted with applying sunscreen to Lainey as she lay on her stomach on her towel. He started at her ankles and slowly worked his way up her legs. Lainey didn't say anything, but he noticed that she kept her legs tightly closed as he moved closer to her hips. He was careful not to touch the bottom of her swimsuit or get too close to her inner thighs. Being so close to her almost naked body was hard for him, and more than once he tried to adjust the uncomfortable bulge in his swimming trunks. When he finished with her thighs and began to apply oil to her back, he calmed down a little and asked, do you mind if I take it slow? I really like this look. Lainey laughed and replied, you like it, right? I was starting to wonder why it was taking so long. By the way, can you unzip my top to apply the cream all over my back? She waited until he complied with her request and added, just don't forget to zip it back up when you're done. She laughed again. Oh, it happened again. Tom laughed, buttoning her top. Everything is ready. It was the most enjoyable job I've had in a long time. If you need more cream, just tell me. At any time. They both laughed at his joke. For the next half hour, they lay side by side, enjoying the sun. Tom applied the cream to the front of his body and lay on his back with his eyes closed, wishing he had asked Lainey to apply it. They joked and talked until Lainey said, I hope there is still some cream left. Time to roll over and get a little tan on the front. I think I can trust you to apply it again, huh? Tom was a little confused by this request and replied, of course. Now, I'll start. He lowered himself to her feet and began to carefully apply the cream to her hands. He worked the top of the feet first, then slowly moved higher, maintaining a respectful distance. Lainey stepped back slightly to make it easier for him to work, and the swimsuit emphasized her graceful figure. He was glad he wore sunglasses. They allowed him to observe her grace without violating his privacy. The swimsuit fitted her in such a way that one could assume how carefully she took care of herself, leaving questions unanswered. Tom wondered if he would ever know the whole truth about her beauty rituals. Gathering his courage, he continued to apply the cream to her stomach, just above her swimsuit top. This turned out to be much less exciting, and he calmly processed her soft skin. As he finished, he lightly ran his hand over the bottom of her bra. They both wore glasses, so when he glanced at her face, he couldn't tell if she was watching him. He wondered if she appreciated his body the same way he appreciated hers. The moment passed, and he put the cream away, stretching out again on his towel next to her. Tom didn't know that just as he was thinking about her, Lainey was also imagining him and noticing how attractive he was. After some time, they decided to make one last swim to wash off the remaining cream and sand stuck to their skin. After swimming, they gathered their towels and clothes and raced to his pickup truck. Tom let Lainey win so she could enjoy the view while he followed her to the parking lot. Quickly throwing on t-shirts and shorts over their swimsuits, they headed back into town to get ready for dinner. The evening passed quickly and successfully. They returned home to shower and change into more appropriate clothes for the upscale restaurant where Tom had made a reservation. At dinner, they joked and chatted a lot, enjoying the food and communication. At the end, Tom suggested, "How about taking the film and coming to my place to watch it?" Lainey immediately agreed. "Great idea. The only problem is deciding whether to take a romantic movie or an action movie." Tom laughed. "You can take both and cast lots to decide which one to watch first." So it was decided, and half an hour later they entered Tom's house with two films in their hands. After they each had a drink, Tom said, "Before watching the film, I would like to show you what I did with my new bedroom." Together they went upstairs to the room that used to belong to Tom's parents. As soon as they entered the room, it became clear that Tom had completely changed its atmosphere. He rearranged the furniture so that the bed was now facing one of the two built-in wardrobes. One chest of drawers was removed completely, and the main cabinet with a mirror was moved to another wall. Several racing photographs appeared on the walls, as well as several pictures of Tom with his parents. "Well, what do you say?" "I have a lot more space now," Tom said. Lainey looked around with interest, appreciating the changes Tom had made. The room did not at all resemble the one she had last seen. "I see you really made this room yours," she remarked. Tom smiled and said, "I especially like this one." He walked to the closet that stood opposite the bed and opened both doors. Inside was a counter with a television, a DVD-VCR combo, and a small stereo system. "Now, if I want to watch TV or listen to music before bed, it won't be a problem. The other closet leaves enough space for all my clothes." Lainey took a closer look at the entertainment system installed in the closet and laughed. "I don't want to ruin your dreams, but we won't watch these movies while lying on your bed." "This is impossible." She laughed again. Tom immediately blushed and exclaimed, "No, no, no, that's not what I meant. We'll watch movies downstairs." The look on his face was so shocked and sincere that Lainey knew he was telling the truth. "It's okay, Tom, I understand." She smiled and took his hand, heading towards the exit. "Maybe some other time we'll watch a movie on this TV." Tom immediately looked at her, trying to understand whether she was joking or not, but it was impossible to make out anything on her face. The topic wasn't brought up again, but Tom kept thinking about Lainey's last line repeatedly as they watched the first movie, a romantic melodrama. However, these thoughts were soon supplanted by others when the two began kissing and hugging while the action on screen slowed down. Lainey could still somehow follow the plot, but Tom almost completely ignored it, focusing on the girl. By the time the movie ended, Lainey was no longer paying attention to him either and responded to Tom with kiss for kiss, caress for caress. Tom slid his hand under her blouse, pushing her bra up so he could caress her breasts. They were both breathing heavily when they were suddenly brought out of the moment by a phone ringing. It was Grace Frost, who wanted to discuss one of the details of the upcoming graduation with Lainey. However, this was enough to bring both of them back to earth. They each had unspoken questions about where their relationship was headed, but the answers had to be left for another day. They decided it was time for Tom to take Lainey home. They kissed for another 10 minutes in the car outside the Frost house before saying goodbye. Tom had a lot on his mind as he drove back. He began to realize that Lainey influenced him much more than any of his previous girlfriends. When he got home, he headed straight to his new bathroom and took a refreshing shower to ease the tension. However, as soon as he was in bed, he felt excited again, thinking about Lainey, while the action movie he had chosen played on the screen, completely ignored by him. The next morning, Tom had been up for about an hour when Lainey called him. She invited him to dinner with her and Grace, which he gladly accepted as it gave him the opportunity to spend more time with her in a relaxed atmosphere. Tom arrived at the Frost house a little before 4 o'clock and brought a bottle of wine from his parents' supplies. Even if it didn't open during dinner, he wanted to do his part. Grace warmly accepted this small gift and promised that they would try it in moderation. While dinner was cooking in the oven, the three of them sat at the kitchen table and discussed the upcoming prom that Tom and Lainey were going to together. This reminded Tom that Lainey would be celebrating her birthday that evening, which meant he needed to pick out a gift for her. After talking with Grace privately, he decided the best option would be to upgrade Lainey's phone with unlimited calls and texts. Not only will this please her, but it will also make it easy for them to keep in touch when she leaves for university. While talking about tuition costs, it became clear that Grace was a little worried. Tom didn't catch all the details, but he understood that she was going to take out a loan from the bank to cover the remaining expenses. Lainey had to spend part of her education savings when the heating and air conditioning system in their house finally broke down. Their conversation was cut short when the timer went off, signaling that dinner was ready. With Tom's help, they quickly set the table and sat down to dinner. The wine he brought went well with the food, and they all drank a small glass. The opportunity to have dinner in the company of loved ones was pleasant for Tom. In recent weeks, he ate mostly alone at home, sometimes going out to a restaurant, and once even had dinner with his grandparents. But this evening in the company of the Frosts especially pleased him. He again felt how much he missed his parents. The evening continued in the living room, where Tom and Lainey sat on the sofa and Grace sat opposite. This made Tom think again about how similar Lainey and her mother were. Grace easily carried on a conversation on any topic from modern music to the latest fashion trends. "Are you sure you're not sisters?" Tom joked, making them both laugh. Around 9 o'clock, Grace said goodnight, not wanting to disturb the newlyweds. After she left, almost an hour passed in hugs, kisses, and passionate touches. They became more and more relaxed with each other, and both realized with regret that it was time to say goodbye. They were looking forward to Friday and prom. Lainey came out to walk Tom to his truck, and he suggested that they could end the evening at his place. There were several parties after the ball, but they decided to wait until after the event to make a final decision. The fact that Lainey didn't immediately reject the idea left Tom some room for imagination. He could only hope that his imagination would be at least half correct. The last days before the prom flew by quickly. Tom was busy with summer classes, and Lainey was busy getting ready for prom and prom. One afternoon, Tom signed up for an updated plan for Lainey's phone, which would take effect on Monday. By prepaying for a year, he was even able to get her a more advanced model for free. Friday was a busy day for everyone. The graduation ceremony took place in the afternoon, where Lainey received her diploma as Tom and her proud mother watched from the audience. Grace, who graduated from school in absentia, had never had the opportunity to participate in such a ceremony, so when she saw her daughter confidently stride across the stage, she could not hold back her tears. The hour after the final diploma was presented was spent taking many photographs. Lainey with her mother, Tom and Lainey with various friends from school. Capturing this important day in Lainey's life largely fell to Tom, and he did an excellent job. He filled 2 memory cards with numerous pictures of the 2 women in the Frost family and himself. There was enough time between the afternoon graduation ceremony and the evening ball for Tom to take the 2 beautiful ladies out to dinner. After the meal, he gave Lainey her birthday present, a beautifully wrapped cell phone. He explained that now she would be able to call as often as she wanted when she left for university. Lainey was delighted with the gift and immediately kissed Tom, without hesitation, right on the spot. Grace's laughter did nothing to help him cope with the slight embarrassment of such a public display of affection. It's time to go home to prepare for the long-awaited evening. At 10 minutes to 8, Tom drove up to the Frost house again to pick up Lainey. When he arrived, she was already nervously waiting for him. Grace had just left to help other volunteers get the ballroom ready, so Tom was able to spend a few minutes alone with Lainey. He managed to take a couple of pictures in her blue dress, which once belonged to his mother. "You look even better than my mom in that dress, Lainey," he said. The dress fit her perfectly, and his unspoken question was answered when she said, "I didn't even have to adjust anything, Tom. It was like it was made for me." She smiled widely as they walked out of the house together to Tom's pickup. As he helped her into the car, her slender hip line was revealed to him for a moment, and he noticed that she was wearing stockings, not pantyhose. The image kept popping into his head over and over again on the way to the dance, and Lainey even asked what he was thinking about when he absent-mindedly missed her words. Instead of explaining what exactly distracted him, he lied that he was worried about whether he had closed the door of the house. For the first couple of hours of the ball, they had fun, chatted with friends, danced a little, and from time to time looked in on Grace, who was on duty at the entrance. As time progressed, more and more slow songs were played, and Tom enjoyed the opportunity to do a lot of slow dancing with Lainey. As they returned to their table after a particularly intimate dance, Tom noticed Grace standing by the door, watching the couples on the dance floor. "Your mother seems to enjoy the music," Tom said. Lainey looked towards her mother and watched her for a moment before saying, "I think she's remembering her youth. She couldn't go to prom like her friends. She was at home with me then." They walked to their table at the edge of the dance floor, and before sitting down, Lainey said, "I'll go to the ladies' room with one of my friends. I think Mom would be really excited to dance today since she missed her prom. Do you mind asking her to dance, Tom?" Tom looked at Lainey, then at her mother, still standing on the opposite side of the room, and replied, "Of course I don't mind, Lainey. Just don't be jealous," he joked. She hit him lightly on the arm and said, "As if I would be jealous of my own mother." With these words, she went to her friend, and soon they disappeared into the ladies' room. Tom watched Grace for a moment and then crossed the dance floor. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice him until he said, "Grace, shall we dance?" She shuddered in surprise and hastily replied, "I'm sure you'd rather dance with Lainey." "Besides, I work, not have fun," she laughed. Lainey went to freshen up her makeup, "and I'm sure you won't get fired if you take a break for one dance." He took her hand and pulled her onto the dance floor, leaving her no chance to refuse. Grace followed him obediently, and when he turned her around in the dance, she smiled widely. "Thank you, Tom. I love to dance, but I rarely have the opportunity." As they began to move to the beat of the music, Tom noticed that her eyes were slightly sparkling and wondered if she was remembering her failed prom. They managed to dance 3 dances before Grace noticed that Lainey had returned. "I see your mate is back, Tom. Thank you for allowing the old lady to return to her youth for a while. I enjoyed it immensely. You are a wonderful dancer, Tom Prentice." Tom immediately objected. "You're not an old lady at all, Grace, and I was pleased too." "I'm just glad I didn't step on your toes," he laughed. They finished the dance next to Lainey, and Grace quickly hugged Tom before telling her daughter, "I borrowed your boyfriend, Lainey. I hope you don't mind. He's a great partner, So don't forget to get him on the dance floor as often as possible. Before Grace left, she heard Lainey say, "You can dance with Tom again later if you want." "I don't mind if he doesn't mind either." Grace smiled and Tom added, "I'd love to dance with your mom anytime, Lainey." During the remaining hours of the ball, Tom and Lainey did not miss almost a single song. When the announcer announced that there were only 5 final tunes left, Lainey looked at her mother and then said to Tom, "Dance the first 2 dances with your mother and the last 3 with me. It looks like she has already finished work and is just standing at the door." Tom immediately agreed and soon found himself back on the dance floor with Grace. She resisted at first, but he insisted, and she had no choice but to accept the invitation. 2 dances flew by, after which he returned to Lainey for the final 3 numbers. As the evening came to an end, the graduates and their couples began to leave. Tom, Lainey, and Grace walked toward the parking lot together. "Mom, don't wait for me at home today. Tom and I will probably go to a couple of graduation parties and then head over to his place." She looked at her mother, paused, and then added, "I'll stay with Tom all night. I'll call you in the morning." Tom was surprised at how easily Lainey described their plans to her mother. It was obvious that she and her mother had a warm and trusting relationship, and that Lainey knew that her mother would not make a scene because of her decisions. Grace turned to them and said, "I want you to have a good time, but be careful not to drink and drive. Now you are adults, and adulthood also means responsibility. I know I can count on you both for this." She smiled, gave them both a quick kiss on the cheek, and headed to her car. Tom had nothing to add to Grace and Lainey's words, so he just shook his head, realizing that his dream was coming true. Lainey would spend the night with him. A few minutes later, they were on their way to the first of 2 house parties they would attend only briefly. Some of the graduates dressed in more casual clothes, and at parties you could see people in a variety of outfits. Some of the less responsible ones had already had too much alcohol to celebrate their graduation from school, but the majority were simply enjoying the holiday. By 2 o'clock in the morning, Tom and Lainey headed to his house, and Lainey traded her seat belt for the opportunity to snuggle up to Tom while he drove. It wasn't far, through quiet residential streets, and Tom wasn't going to deprive himself of the pleasure of feeling her so close by insisting that she buckle up. They both laughed as they entered the house through the garage. When Tom offered a choice of a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, Lainey chose wine, and he supported her choice. While they were drinking wine, music was playing in the living room, and they were dancing. When their glasses were empty, Lainey said, "Why don't we take these discs upstairs and put them on your stereo in your room? You can get much more comfortable there." Tom couldn't believe his ears. Lainey herself suggested what he didn't dare say. "They say great minds think alike." "I was just about to suggest the same thing," he smiled. "Well, I thought so, but I didn't want to wait all night for you to work up the courage." Lainey laughed and easily settled into his arms as he pulled her towards him. After a long kiss, they took the CDs, turned off the light, and, holding hands, went upstairs. In the room, Tom put on a CD of slow music and pulled Lainey back to him to continue the dance. Despite all the confidence she had shown in front of her mother and Tom downstairs, Lainey was now clearly nervous and a little embarrassed, as evidenced by the blush on her face. When the music ended, Tom kissed her tenderly and said, "Why don't we change clothes? We can still dance in our underwear. It's not much different from swimwear." He looked closely at Lainey, waiting for her reaction. She was clearly losing confidence, but still answered, "I think it's okay. I don't want you to think I'm frivolous. I'm not innocent, but I have very little experience." She blushed even more. Her embarrassment was obvious. Tom visibly relaxed after her words and said, "Thank you for telling me that, Lainey. It's pretty much the same for me. A couple of times in the back seat of my mom's car hardly qualifies as an experience. Let's just take our time and see how it goes." He gently ran his hand through her hair and then kissed her tenderly. "I really enjoy being with you, and I don't want you to feel awkward or disappointed." If you suddenly feel uncomfortable or want to slow down, just tell me." Lainey smiled with relief and answered quietly, "I really like you too, Tom. I'm glad we talked about this. My past experiences were not nearly as magical as I had hoped. I think mainly because everything was happening too quickly." She kissed him lightly and, stepping back, added, "Well, unzip me. It's time to get rid of this beautiful dress." She turned her back to him, and Tom managed to notice how her cheeks flushed red again. He carefully unzipped her blue dress, which his mother had once worn, and Lainey carefully stepped out of it. Underneath was light blue underwear, which also belonged to his mother, and which he remembered on the day of the funeral. His fantasy came true, and Tom quickly began to undress, leaving only his underwear on. Lainey looked at him as he took off his clothes, and then, a little embarrassed, she turned to face him. The thin fabric of her underwear hid almost nothing, and Tom could not help but look in admiration. "God, Lainey, you are incredibly beautiful. I remember this underwear, and I must admit that at the time I was trying to imagine how it would look on you." He looked down at her slender legs and added, "And the stockings are just perfect. Reality is much better than fantasy." He laughed and opened his arms. Lainey was still blushing, not knowing where to put her hands, either covering herself with them or simply lowering them along her body. "You were the star of my fantasies too, Tom Prentice," she whispered and stepped into his arms. The next moment, their lips met in a long kiss. The temperature in the room rose noticeably, and the dancing was completely forgotten. Their hands slid over each other's bodies, exploring every line. It is unclear who took the first step towards the bed, but they soon stumbled upon its edge. Tom broke the kiss and walked over to the light switch, dimming the light until it was almost dark. While he was doing this, Lainey pulled back the covers and settled down on the bed. When he turned around, she was already lying in the center, slightly raised on her elbow. He quickly joined her, and they were back in each other's arms, kissing and caressing each other tenderly. They were in no hurry. Almost 15 minutes passed before the clothes were left behind. Finally, Tom broke the kiss, turned to the bedside table, and took out a package of condoms. "It's a pity that we need him. I'd like to know what it's like without him." He was about to put it on when Lainey said quietly, "I've never tried without it either. Some girls say it's nicer this way." She hesitated for a moment and then added, "I take pills, so there is no need to worry in this regard. And if we both have never done it without protection, then we have nothing to worry about. Maybe we should just forget about him. What do you think?" Tom smiled and said, "I heard the same thing. If you don't mind, then so do I." He turned around, placed the condom on the bedside table, and then moved closer to Lainey again. Over the next hour, they made love twice, both times in the classic position. The second time, they managed to achieve pleasure at the same time. Neither of them tried anything they'd heard about or seen in the adult films they'd both seen a couple of times. This evening was solely for enjoying each other and getting to know each other better. Both thought about how they would like their relationship to develop and continue. They eventually fell asleep in each other's arms and slept soundly until a phone call woke them up. It turned out to be a wrong number. They both felt a slight awkwardness, waking up for the first time in the same bed with their lover. They kissed quickly, worried that the other might be uncomfortable with too much intimacy before they brushed their teeth and showered. Tom quickly invited Lainey to join him in the bathroom, where he gave her a new toothbrush, after which they stood in front of the sink together and began brushing their teeth. Both were completely naked and stealthily examined each other, and both liked what they saw in the full morning light. The next stop was the shower, and despite mutual attempts to arouse each other, they still managed to wash themselves. The shower took so long that they had to turn off the water for fear that it would soon become cold. Neither of them wanted the cold water to interrupt their mutual excitement, even for a moment. "How about we go back to bed and pick up where we left off last night?" Tom suggested, drying Lainey's ample breasts with a towel. She smiled at him, and instead of answering, she simply took his hand and led him back to the bed. Over the next hour, they enjoyed intimacy, discovering something new about each other. Lainey gained the courage to take the initiative, allowing herself more freedom. Tom watched her with admiration, responding to her movements with light touches and gentle kisses. At first, Lainey was a little embarrassed to be the center of attention, but gradually the tension disappeared, giving way to genuine pleasure. Their interaction became more and more harmonious, and feelings became intense. At some point, overwhelmed by surging emotions, they merged in a long, sensual kiss, feeling complete unity. When the wave of pleasure subsided, she relaxed and lay on top of Tom. Several minutes passed before she broke the kiss and said, "Oh, Tom, it was even better than I could have hoped for. Now I understand what the girls meant when they said that sex with the right person is the most beautiful thing that can happen." Tom turned them on their sides without breaking their intimacy and answered, "I know what you mean, Lainey. When my father talked to me about these things, he said that I would have a lot of fun when I was with the right girl." He thought for a moment and then continued, "Now I understand a little more why he was so worried when he found out that his mother was cheating on him." Realizing what he had said, he hastily added, "Don't get me wrong, Lainey. I just mean that sharing moments like this with someone you have feelings for is something special and shouldn't be thrown away." He paused, not sure whether he had expressed his thoughts correctly. Lainey was thoughtful, and Tom was about to apologize for his words when suddenly she said, "I understand what you mean, Tom. I know that you are not trying to compare our relationship with your parents' marriage. After all, we don't know each other well enough yet." She thought about her words and then added, "I hope you don't think I'm too strict, but it's too early for both of us to perceive our relationship as anything more than just a romance between a guy and a girl." Tom smiled and immediately answered, "I'm quite happy with the boyfriend and girl option. I'd be happy and proud to be your boyfriend, if that's what you mean. I think that after spending the night together, we are definitely not just casual acquaintances." "That's exactly what I mean, Tom," Lainey said with a slight laugh. "And don't think that I would spend the night with just anyone. I hope that we will be together all summer, and then we will see what happens when I leave for university. This can make our relationships difficult." Tom frowned when he heard this, but knew she was right. He started this conversation himself, and now doesn't know how to change it. Luckily, Lainey did it for him. "I'm hungry, Tom. How are you cooking breakfast?" Pleased by her change of topic, Tom immediately promised to prepare a full breakfast, and they both got up to get dressed. He lent her a tracksuit, which she put on over her underwear, and he quickly dressed in similar clothes. While Lainey tidied up her hair and put on makeup, Tom went to the kitchen to prepare food. A few minutes later, the aroma of coffee mixed with the smell of frying bacon, and Lainey followed this delicious smell into the kitchen. They had a leisurely breakfast, having a good time. Lainey then called her mother, saying she would be home soon, and they drove to her house in Tom's pickup truck. When Lainey met her mother, her cheeks were pink with slight embarrassment. It was their first meeting after the night spent in bed with Tom. But her mother quickly dispelled the awkwardness, saying, "Judging by your faces, you had a great time after the prom." She laughed, seeing their embarrassment, and added, "I won't judge you. I'm just glad Lainey is taking her pills and that she has such a wonderful boyfriend who makes her happy. Let's not let what happened last night affect our relationship. Lainey, you are still my daughter, and you, Tom, are still the most deserving guy she has ever dated." Grace's statement calmed the young couple, and they quickly moved on to other topics of conversation, starting with discussing the success of the graduation ceremony and the dance the night before. Grace thanked Tom again for dancing with her, saying she knew he didn't have to, but she really appreciated it. Tom stayed at the Frost house until early afternoon, leaving after a light lunch with Lainey and her mother and accepting an invitation to dinner with the Frost family on Monday. He had already promised to visit his grandparents and stay the night with them. His grandfather had several things he needed help with, and Tom was going to fulfill those obligations as well as spend time with them. They were his only family in town, and he knew they were too important to him to allow himself to distance himself from them. Quickly changing clothes and packing his overnight bag, he headed to his grandparents' house. As he drove, memories of the evening he spent with Lainey came back to his mind again and again. The smile brought on by these memories was still on his face when he arrived at their home. Tom returned home in the early hours of Monday after spending the weekend with his grandparents. He enjoyed spending time with them and also helping his grandfather with some of the jobs he didn't feel comfortable doing on his own. All of them involved the use of stairs, and the grandfather, who was already 65 years old, experienced dizziness at heights, while this did not pose a problem for Tom. He ended up painting both gables of their house areas his grandfather had left unfinished and also did a few minor jobs. The weekend with his grandparents gave them the opportunity to spend a lot of time together, which Tom was especially happy about. He still had doubts about whether they felt awkward around him, considering what his father had done to their daughter and himself. But by the time he left, he was already sure that these were groundless fears. The painting didn't take long, so they had plenty of hours to just talk. Tom left their home confident that his grandparents had put the events of the winter behind them, just as he had desperately tried to do. After he changed his clothes and called back a few missed calls left on the answering machine, he decided to stop by Lainey and her mother a little earlier. He was invited to dinner, but arrived at their house around 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Tom knocked on the door, and when Grace opened, he immediately said, "Sorry, I'm so early. I've run out of things to do at home, so I thought I'd spend a little time with Lainey before dinner." As he said this, he noticed that Grace looked upset, and he was almost sure that he saw traces of tears on her cheeks. He was about to apologize and suggest coming back later, but Grace said, "Sorry, Tom. Lainey was called into work before her evening shift ended. She won't be back until 7. Now Tom was completely sure that Grace was clearly very worried about something, so he asked, "Did something happen, Grace?" It turned out that she was holding back her emotions as her voice trembled when she answered, "You better come in, Tom. I'm afraid I'm about to cry, and I wouldn't want to do it on the porch in front of the neighbors. It's bad enough that you see me like this. Something happened, and I don't know what to do. Maybe you can give me some advice." Grace immediately turned around and headed towards the kitchen, and Tom noticed that she was wiping her eyes with a handkerchief that she had taken from her blouse pocket. "Are you sure, Grace?" he asked, following her. "I don't want to make you feel uncomfortable, but I don't want to leave knowing you're upset." "What's the matter?" When she reached the kitchen, she grabbed some fresh tissues from the box and continued wiping her eyes. Tom hated seeing her in this state because he always knew her as an energetic and cheerful woman. Now he didn't know what to do. She was still silent, and he asked again, "What happened, Grace? I've never seen you like this. How can I help?" After a couple of sobs, she finally sat up and said, "I don't think you or anyone else can help now. I just got back from the bank, and they turned me down for a loan that Lainey needed for university. Now that I'm only working part-time, the loan officer felt that after paying all my bills, I wouldn't have enough money left to make the loan payments. I told him that I would find another part-time job, even part-time, to cover the payments, but they still decided that this was not enough to meet their requirements. I don't know what to do, Tom. Lainey is so passionate about getting into this program at State University, and it will hurt her so much if she doesn't succeed. I really didn't think there would be problems with the bank, so I even asked for a little more money in case of unforeseen circumstances. Now I don't know if it was a mistake. Maybe if I had only asked for the most necessary amount, they would have been more willing to give me a loan." She tried to wipe away her tears again before adding, "She will hate me, I just know it. She'll never admit it, but I'm sure that's how she'll feel. I always told her that we would have enough money to send her to university. Now she'll think I let her down." Tom wasn't sure what to say, so at first he just tried to calm her down and help her relax. As she stood up to pour herself a glass of cold water and grab a fresh napkin, he considered the situation and what he could offer to help. He was about to repeat his advice to remain calm when a thought struck him. "Sit down, Grace. Tell me how things really are, and how much did you ask the bank for a loan?" The cold water seemed to calm her down a little, and she replied, Lainey has some money from her part-time job, and I have some left over from her education account. I asked the bank for $15,000, but we actually need a little less to pay for her first year of education and related expenses. I figured that by next summer, taking into account her work and what I hope to save during this time, we would have enough money for her second year. And now I don't even know what to think. So, if you had an extra $15,000, everything would have worked out well for you and Lainey. That's what I thought, but the credit manager pointed out that if I didn't return to work full-time at the plant, I wouldn't even be able to repay the loan. So how can I save money for the next year of her studies? She paused to blow her nose before continuing. I didn't expect to be working only part-time for so long, and I didn't want to take a second job that I would have to quit immediately if I was brought back full-time. Now I regret that I didn't immediately find another part-time job. Her eyes began to fill with tears again, and she continued, I don't know how to tell her when she gets home from work that I didn't receive the loan. Tom rose from his seat and said, I have an idea how to settle everything. Just stay calm, I'll be right back. Before he could finish his sentence, he was already heading to the front door and out to his pickup truck. When he got to the car, he took something out of the glove compartment, and a few minutes later, he stuffed a piece of paper into his shirt pocket and turned back towards the house. When he entered the kitchen, Grace was still sitting at the table with a resigned expression on her face. I have a way around this problem, but I beg you not to tell Lainey about this. I like her, and I don't want this to affect our relationship. He pulled out a completed personal check from his pocket and handed it to Grace. Grace looked completely puzzled as she took the small piece of paper and unfolded it. As soon as she glanced at the check, she immediately raised her eyes and looked intently at Tom. Shock replaced her bewilderment. Tom, what are you doing? I can't take it. I can't accept your money to solve my problems. She started to move the check back towards Tom, but he put his hand on her palm, stopping her movement. Yes, you can have it, Grace. I want to lend you this money. My parents left me more money than I need right now, and I really want to help. Consider it a personal loan from me to you. I'll be your banker, but with the difference that I don't want you to pay me until you can afford it. He hesitated, smiled, and continued. I know you well enough to trust you. I just don't want Lainey to know about it. I'm afraid this might affect our relationship. I don't want her to feel like she has to date me because I helped you. This is my only request. Grace looked embarrassed and didn't know what to say, but after thinking for a while, she said, I can't take your money, Tom. We've only known each other for a couple of months, and I don't want anyone to think that I'm taking advantage of you. You are a very kind person to make me such an offer, but I simply cannot accept it. Tom immediately replied, Write me a receipt if you want. Although I don't need it, if it makes you feel safer, you can do it. I'm serious. They argued for a long time until Grace finally agreed to take the check. I will take it only on the condition that you draw up an official loan agreement for me, and I want it to include the interest rate. Tom extended his right hand to her and said, Let's shake hands, Grace, and we'll have a deal. I don't really need an official document, but if that's what you want, I'll get it all done tomorrow. For now, just put away the check and tell Lainey that you have money for her education and expenses. Grace shook his hand tightly, wrapping both of her palms around it. Tears appeared in her eyes again, but this time there was a smile on her face. After finishing the handshake, she stepped forward and hugged him. Tom didn't know how to react, and his arms first hung helplessly in the air before he finally returned her hug. Grace put her head on his shoulder and after a few seconds said, Thank you, Tom, thank you. You answered my prayers. Tom suddenly realized that he was holding an incredibly attractive woman in his arms, and his body began to react. But as soon as it dawned on him that this was his girlfriend's mother, he quickly let go of her and carefully pulled away, creating the necessary distance between them. Before retreating, Grace leaned forward and kissed him firmly on the cheek. Tom, I really want you to prepare a formal loan agreement for me. I am extremely grateful for your help, but I don't want anyone to think that I took advantage of your generosity. If your grandparents ever find out that I borrowed money from you, they might be very angry with me." Tom blushed deeply before he broke their hug, and was only now starting to return to his normal color. He quickly replied, "I won't tell anyone about this, especially because I don't want Lainey to ever find out. I think we both have good reasons to make sure no one finds out about this." They returned to their seats at the kitchen table, and Grace took the check out of her purse and put it inside before saying, "You and I have a deal, Tom. I just don't know how to thank you enough for your generosity and kindness." Tom laughed and said, "I know how you can combine both interest and your desire to thank me for the check. How do you like this deal instead of interest?" An idea occurred to him, and he continued, "Let this loan be with interest in the form of one Sunday dinner per month until full repayment. And by repay, I mean that you will simply put whatever amount you can into a bank account until you decide to pay off the debt in full. Do these conditions suit you?" Grace didn't quite understand why he was suggesting such a thing, and the look on her face showed it. "Why don't you want to charge the usual interest, Tom? After all, if the money was in the bank, you would receive interest on it. It's easy for me to save money until I have the required amount, but are you sure that's what you want to do?" He was still smiling as he answered, "I'll gladly trade cash interest for one of your dinners once a month. I get tired of cooking myself, and I also can't go to dinner with my grandparents every Sunday. Think about my offer before you agree. Perhaps one dinner a month will be worth more than the usual interest." Now Grace laughed. "Believe me, I think I will benefit if you agree to pay for my Sunday dinners. I just want you to think about it for a day or two before you talk yourself into doing something you might regret later." They decided to end their discussion of Tom's loan and change the topic to the upcoming dinner they planned to share with Lainey when she returned from work. After drinking a soda, Grace began to prepare dinner, and Tom helped where he could. By the time Lainey arrived, everything was ready to be served. 3 days later, Tom called Grace just after noon, when he knew she would be at home and Lainey would be with her friends, looking for clothes for university. "Of course, Tom, come," Grace answered. "I'm just free. Just got back from work and was given an extra half-day shift as the plant is getting a little busier. I'll be right there, Grace. I know that Lainey went shopping, and I just have the loan agreement you wanted. Look at it and tell me if everything suits you." 20 minutes later, they were sitting at the kitchen table with a soda, and Grace was carefully reading the document that Tom had handed her. The front was a standard form with the blanks filled in, but when she turned the page and read a few lines, she burst out laughing. Instead of interest, the second party undertakes to provide the first party with one Sunday dinner per month. By mutual agreement of the parties, this condition may be interpreted as 12 Sunday dinners per year. Laughter prevented her from speaking, but when she finally controlled herself, she said, "I can't believe you made it so legally correct. At least that's what I think. Did you like it?" Tom grinned. "This was compiled by my lawyer, Fred Greenstein. Both he and his secretary found it quite funny. I was just visiting him on another matter and decided at the same time to show him this agreement so that you could be sure that I was not making a mistake. You can rest assured that he said he trusts my judgment." Grace continued to laugh as she read the wording of the contract, but without hesitation, she took the pen and signed her name on the dotted line. Then she handed the document to Tom, who also signed it, then signed a second copy and handed it to Grace. "Here's your copy, but I hope you hide it so Lainey won't find it." They laughed a little more about the formality of the agreement, after which Tom left. Over the next week, Tom and Lainey settled into a routine that they repeated over and over again throughout the summer. From Monday to Friday, Tom was busy with classes and Lainey was busy with work. On Friday evening, Tom came to pick up Lainey for their now traditional date and the first evening of the weekend, which they almost always spent together. As usual, he was on time and Lainey was late. Grace met him at the door. "Come in, Tom. Lainey isn't quite ready yet." Tom laughed and entered the house. "I should probably either tell her we're leaving earlier than we actually do or start coming later myself." Grace laughed too. "It's not worth it. Then I won't have the pleasure of enjoying your company while we wait." She offered Tom a soda while they waited, and as they sat down at the kitchen table, she added with a laugh, "I don't know where Lainey got this habit of being late. Certainly not from me." "Oh, it's okay, Grace. It's really not a problem. We don't have any special plans for the evening. We're going to go to the lake and see what the others are doing. Surely someone will bring a car with good speakers and an impromptu dance party will take place." Grace shook her head and said, "Everything has changed so much in just a few years. When I was a teenager, the drive-in movie theater was still open in the summer, and I don't think the car radios of that time could have provided loud enough sound for real dancing." Tom laughed. "Times really do change, don't they?" He became serious for a moment and then added, "Mom and Dad told me how it was when they were dating." He fell silent, lost in thought, and then continued. "Every day something reminds me of them and makes me realize how much I miss them." Grace felt guilty for starting a conversation that obviously struck a chord with Tom and said, "Sorry, Tom. I didn't want to bring up sad memories for you again." She patted his hand lightly. Tom was taken aback for a second by her concern, but quickly laughed. "It's okay, Grace. You don't have to worry about what you say in front of me. It's been over 6 months now, and the memories don't hurt me as much as they used to." Their conversation was interrupted by Lainey bursting into the room with a small zippered bag. "Sorry to keep you waiting, Tom. I know I always say this, but I promise to become more punctual." She laughed and kissed him quickly on the lips and then kissed her mother on the cheek. Grace looked at the bag in her daughter's hands and asked, "What do you have there? I hope you didn't take a bottle of my white wine." There was a slight reproach in her voice. Lainey immediately exclaimed indignantly, "Ma'am, well, you know that I would never do that." She handed the bag to her mother and, smiling cheerfully, added, "Here, you can check it yourself. I was going to give Tom a surprise, but that's okay now." Grace opened the bag slightly, looked inside, and then opened it completely. "Why are your underwear here?" She moved several things and, raising her head in surprise, added, "And why is my blue peignoir here?" Lainey smiled slyly. "I think now is a good time to tell you that I wasn't planning on coming home tonight. I'm staying at Tom's and wanted to do a little fashion show for him. Are you satisfied now?" Tom, who was listening to the conversation, instantly blushed with embarrassment and would gladly be anywhere but here. Grace also turned slightly pink, although not as much as he did. "Well, I'm sorry I ruined your surprise," she said, still a little embarrassed. "When were you going to tell me that you weren't coming home?" Lainey took the bag from her mother and handed it to Tom before answering. "I was going to call you later, but now I understand that it's better that you found out about it now. You can call Peter and see if he's free tonight." She giggled and added, "Then you wouldn't have to come home today either." Grace blushed even more and quickly replied, "Oh, really?" She put one hand on Tom's shoulder, and with the other she took Lainey's forearm and gently pushed them both towards the door. "Now you two go and have a nice evening. And you, Lainey, stop worrying about how I spend my evenings." The couple quickly left, and Grace, watching them drive away, smiled faintly. When their car disappeared around the bend, she turned around, headed to the phone, and dialed a number that she obviously knew by heart. Tom and Lainey did find a group of friends at the lake, and the fun continued until almost midnight. The couples gradually moved away over the last half hour, and the party eventually broke up. Tom had a great evening with Lainey. They danced when they were in the mood, and when they were tired, they kissed under the stars. Of course, most of the time he couldn't stop thinking about what Lainey was up to with her mother's underwear and negligee. As they were returning to town, Tom asked, "Are you still planning on staying the night with me, Lainey? I don't want to count on anything in advance. I wouldn't want you to think that I take this for granted." Lainey unbuckled her seat belt and slid closer to Tom as she answered, "Of course I do, Tom. Last time you looked at my lingerie so fascinated that I decided to give you a little show. If, of course, you are interested." She laughed when Tom turned his head sharply towards her and quickly blurted out, "Of course I'm interested, Lainey. I just... I didn't think you were serious. I assumed that these were probably the clothes you were going to wear tomorrow. I might actually wear some of these in the morning, but you made me feel so desirable when you saw me in the blue set after prom, so I wanted to see what you thought of my other outfits." Tom quickly looked back to the road, letting his imagination run wild for a few seconds before quietly answering, "Oh yes, I'm definitely interested." He hugged her for a few seconds before saying, "But I think you should put your seat belt back on, even though it's very nice sitting with you like this. It will be safer this way." Just before Lainey put her seat belt back on, Tom said, "I wanted to ask you about what you told Mom before we left. I heard you mention Peter and said she should call him. What was it about?" Lainey laughed softly and replied, "I'm not sure if I should answer, Tom. Mom might be embarrassed or unpleasant if she found out that I told you about Peter." She thought for a few seconds and then continued, "Although, by and large, she has nothing to be ashamed of, so I'll tell you. He works in the same office as his mother. I think he's about 55. His wife died many years ago, and he and my mom have, well, something of a relationship." She turned to Tom before explaining, "They meet every couple of weeks, although sometimes less often. Mom used to go to him only for a few hours in the evening to spend the night at home with me, but over the last couple of years, she has been staying at his place more and more often." Tom glanced at Lainey briefly before asking, "Are they serious about each other? Are you going to get married or live together?" "No, Tom. This is something different." She hesitated and then added, "I guess you could say they're just friends with benefits, if you know what I mean. I met him several times when he came to pick up his mother to go to a banquet or corporate event together. He is a nice person, but I know for sure that everything is not serious with them. Mom has hardly dated men since I was born. I love that she has Peter to make her happy. I always notice when they spend time together because Mom looks a lot happier for days afterwards." She reached out and gently touched Tom's arm before adding, "About the same way I was happier for the few days after graduation, which I spent with you." It was dark outside, so Lainey didn't see Tom blush, but he still asked, "Did I make you happy?" "Oh yes, Tom. Yes, yes." She giggled and fell silent, lost in the memories of that night after graduation. They drove in silence for a couple more minutes before Lainey said, "You know, I'm sure Mom has already called him. Today is the perfect evening for this because she knows for sure that I'm not going home. I'll try to call her." Lainey took out her phone, waited for a few rings, and then laughed and said, "She's not at home, Tom." The answering machine turned on. "I bet if I called Peter, I'd find her there." She laughed again and then added, "It's better not to do this. She probably won't be happy if I call at the wrong moment. We wouldn't want her to call us at the wrong time either, would we?" Tom just grinned and nodded. A few minutes later, they arrived at Tom's house and hurriedly went inside. Tom didn't forget to take the suitcase that Lainey had given him earlier. Tom took Lainey home on Saturday afternoon. They slept for a long time, which was quite justified because they went to bed only after 2 in the morning, when they finally turned off the bedside lamp and hugged each other for a good night's sleep. When they ran into the house, Grace met them in the kitchen. "Easy, you two," she laughed. "You're old enough to know that you shouldn't run around the house." Tom and Lainey staged a comic competition among themselves to see who could reach the living room first. Lainey wanted Tom to watch a romantic movie with her, and he hoped to catch part of the NASCAR race that had begun. After Grace reined them in, they agreed to watch the race for a bit first and then turn on the movie. As they settled down on the couch, Lainey whispered in Tom's ear, "Have you noticed how pink my mother's cheeks are? And how did she immediately start smiling, even though she had just scolded us? She's always like this after meetings with Peter." Tom grinned. "Your mother always smiles, and in my opinion, she has a normal complexion. You just notice things that only women notice." He laughed and dodged when Lainey pretended to playfully punch him in the shoulder. Men, Mom and her friends are right. Men generally do not notice small details in a woman's appearance. They spent the day taking turns operating the controls so Tom could watch the rest of the race, including the cliffhanger ending, and then watch a movie with Lainey. Grace pleasantly surprised them by preparing homemade pizza, which the three of them happily ate during a break in the film. Tom had planned in advance to go to church in the morning with his grandparents, knowing how important it was for them, so he didn't stay until late. Before he left, Grace looked into the living room. I wanted to ask would you like to join us for dinner on Sunday, Tom? I'm going to make a roast and an apple pie. She deliberately emphasized the word interesting, and Tom immediately understood what she meant. He quickly replied, I'd be happy to have dinner with you if you're sure it won't cause you any inconvenience. At the same time, he carefully watched Lainey, but she did not seem to find anything unusual in this invitation. On Sunday evening, after returning home from a wonderful dinner, Tom opened the folder with a copy of the loan agreement he had entered into with Grace and added a page where he noted that the interest for that month had been paid in full. This page is quite enough for many of the same entries. When he finished, he sat back and thought that this deal had turned out to be a good deal for everyone. Moreover, it seemed to him that he received even more than he expected, because in addition to food, he enjoyed the company of Grace and Lainey as if he was receiving double payment. But then he became a little more thoughtful when he remembered that Lainey would be leaving for university in September. This will be a real test for their relationship. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even click to the next one.